Elise Micheals, welcome to the pod.
Hey, so happy to be here.
So look, we're off to a good start because your first attempt at my name you got correct. I'm already impressed. So well done. That's
I'm
so
so
great.
glad. I'll add that is from my travels. I really try hard to understand the different cultures and names. So
It shows. It definitely shows. And speaking of travel, so you told me before we hit record, you're moving to Mexico tomorrow?
I sure am.
Let's go. Okay, living that nomadic life. I
Yeah.
like it. So okay, I want to ask you just as a starting point because this is the first thing that caught my attention when I got onto your stuff. I mean, you obviously have a gift for communicating, coaching, like helping people work through issues. What is it that motivates a woman like you to work specifically with men?
When I first got started 6 years ago, I saw that men didn't have a lot of support when it came to mental health. They were the only ones reaching out to me for help, and I thought it was weird, but then I just really realized that there weren't a lot of people that they felt like they could connect with, that they felt like wouldn't judge them when they were expressing their issues. And so I have a lot of empathy for men and the issues that they go through. So it really inspires me to keep working with them, especially when you have men as your clients. They're just so awesome. You get to see a different side of them. So I really enjoy it, and that keeps me inspired and motivated.
Yeah, for sure. What are you noticing in men today? Like we've kind of gone through a couple interesting waves the last few years between, toxic masculinity and mental health and men showing more empathy and like there's been a bunch of different phases that I feel like the whole male conversation has gone through. What are you observing in your community right now? What seem to be the issues that are coming up or subjects that guys are really wanting help with?
Core issues that men usually struggle with are relationships. But what I'm seeing as a trend in society is these extreme pendulum swings. There was a call to mental health like 4 years ago when COVID happened. So, a drive for men to express themselves, to have a lot of empathy, to be understood. But as time has gone on, now I'm seeing kind of, I'm not sure if you're noticing this too, the kind of opposite pendulum swing where men are kind of going back to we don't need to express emotions, we need to be tougher, like they're feeling the consequences kind of maybe too much empathy, and like they're not harnessing their masculine power. So it's just really interesting to observe that they are feeling less powerful, less masculine, because maybe they adopted too much of the feminine essence. But the core wounding of both of those is usually always relationships. Like that's where you see the impact of that.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into that. I know you have a lot to share there, but I just want to reinforce what you said because I feel like not only have I witnessed that, but I think I've experienced it myself as a man, like really going through that wave of wanting to be more empathetic, understanding how neglectful I have been of my emotions, and that's a huge part of my recovery story from pornography addiction as well. Is I really did have to go there, and then there is such a thing as like going there too much. Like you said, the pendulum can swing too far. And we've also seen the pendulum swing too far the other way. Like that has historically been the narrative around men, which is that we're too closed off and we're not open and we don't acknowledge our emotions, and then it causes all this dysfunction and we kind of blame everyone else for it. What do you think is that middle ground? If the pendulum is perfectly centered, what does it look like for a man to balance that conversation effectively?
When you can understand the full range of your emotions without feeling the need to express them to everybody, or without feeling the need to make sure that people understand you and be able to control yourself, that's the peak for a man. Because a lot of men that I see today, like with the Andrew Tate culture and the red pill culture, they're going, oh, express your emotions, but only to your brothers, never to a woman. They can't handle it. But you're still creating almost a prison for yourself as a man when you care about what somebody else thinks about you expressing your emotions. So you don't realize that you're not going forward, you're just going sideways. And what we seek to create in my coaching relationships is understanding and validating yourself and your own experience, not needing someone else's validation by way of expressing too much, or needing to just lose control of yourself, like getting too angry or getting too sad. You're able to control those things and release them in a healthy way when it's an appropriate time.
Yeah, see, I think that's the part that we missed at times in that conversation was the releasing part, where it's like, hey, this is like a means to an end. Like there is an end where you work through
Yeah.
the emotions of it, and then you're more mature, or you reach a resolution in that conflict, or whatever it is. And I think again, it's like kind of classic human behavior. Like we get a little bit too obsessed with the how instead of just being focused with where we're going and what it's leading us to. So I think it's a really good point. Another thing that I've seen you talk about online, and I mentioned I wanted to ask you about this, is the responsibility that men take on. Because I think this is really tied into like gender roles and some of those larger ideological conversations as men are trying to evaluate like where are the lines and what should a guy do, what shouldn't a guy do. And I think this responsibility thing is always going to be there. Obviously, like this is definitely part of the role of a man is to take on responsibility. And then there is a cumbersome side of it as well, where like it's kind of the same pendulum swing conversation where we can almost take on too much responsibility or we suffer in silence and we feel the weight of the world on our shoulders unnecessarily. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because it sounds like the men that you're working with seem to deal with this quite a bit, this burdensome responsibility. What is that and why is it happening?
Absolutely. Well, society places a lot of pressure on men, or it used to have a lot of responsibility, but responsibility without any kind of payback or fulfillment, because they would take on the responsibility of other people too. And men can handle a lot of responsibility that they know is going to pay off, like a heavy workload, a heavy goal list. Like a man will push himself in the gym, a man will push himself at work because he sees the tangible impact of those things. But when a man takes on responsibility to heal his partner or do the job of his partner when they are emotionally immature, that's when he starts to feel way overwhelmed, burdened. He feels like he's alone, like he can't trust anybody, like everybody wants something from him. And it's that kind of responsibility that we want to release because we are not in charge of another human's ability to process emotions or to heal their life. And that's kind of where the feminist movement um, misses the mark, right? Because women think that men are trying to like tell them they can't work or take the jobs away from them or whatever. So women are like hardcore, like I can do everything by myself. When really it's like men were actually just taking on the emotional responsibility of the woman, and it was making women feel disempowered. Because when we take on the responsibility of our partner, it's like subconsciously saying, I don't believe you can handle this, or I'm not capable of handling you in a bad state, so I'm going to try to eliminate the problem as quickly as possible instead of allowing you to figure it out. And both of us grow together, me with my capacity to hold space for you, and you with your ability to figure out problems. So when we take more responsibility of more of our own goals, our own passions, our own fulfillment, we stay on course. We never feel burnt out because we're taking on only a load that's meant for us and built for us and allowing people to solve their own problems. So we have respect for them and then they have respect for themselves.
Man, that's so good. One of my mentors, his name's Gary, and Gary just said this to me very recently. He said, "You need to be a coach in all areas of your life." Because professionally, I'm a coach. Like I get the coaching model and the mindset, and what you just talked about, like that whole concept of you hold space for other people, and the holding space can be very powerful to help people solve their own problems. You ask the right question, or you just stay in the issue long enough, and people start to problem solve. It's amazing how that works. And then I think there's a lot of guys who professionally can do this. Like you don't have to be a coach. You can be a leader or a manager and you're solving problems all day and you're using this skill set. But then like what Gary said to me that just kind of hit me is he's like, no, all areas. Like you need to be a coach at home. And with your staff, you need to be a coach. Like you can't be swooping in and solving everybody's problems and taking on that responsibility. It's their problem to solve, but you just get to help them do it by, like you're saying, creating that space and letting them basically become the problem solvers that they are. So I guess my main question to you is how do you help men create space and resist the urge to swoop in and problem solve and take on that responsibility?
Well, in order for a man to create space for someone else, he has to learn how to do it for himself. A lot of men will disregard their own feelings and their own emotions and then suddenly try to solve somebody else's. Well, how can you do that if you don't even know how to understand your own? So I told them, like, let's back up, and I need you to be in your body. I need you to feel what it's like to have certain emotions that you're feeling and express them and move past them. And then you will understand on a physiological level what it's like to hold space for someone else instead of assuming you know the solution because you don't want to feel the pain of whatever they're feeling or whatever you're trying to run from. Because solving somebody else's problem is really just running from whatever the problem is.
Yeah, right. So it's so leaving the space is really about leaving that space for yourself first. So giving yourself that permission to sit in the difficulties, to work through everything, and I guess building that skill for yourself creates that capacity for you to do it for others.
Absolutely. Well, then men try to rush through things because they just want to get to the solution. They just want to get over it. They just want to get past it. And so part of it is really like slowing down and being like, listen, this has just got to suck for a minute. Like, just for a minute, though, like, can you have patience for a minute? Because the skill sets are not necessarily the problem solving. The skill sets are built from the resistance you feel from giving self compassion to yourself, from being able to have sadness. Because if you just want to rush through it, well, now you have to practice patience. Now you have to practice discipline. And all of these core character traits are going to transfer into other responsibilities that you have in your life. If you see yourself as a man not having capacity for certain things, those are self disciplines that you're probably not implementing for yourself. And that's why you're struggling in all the other areas or falling short.
No, it's really true, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that whole slowing down thing is just something that we're getting worse at as a society. I often tell people like this is like one of my core messages, which is that an internet filter is not going to save you from your addiction. And one of the things I've realized more recently is I think the reason that for a porn addict, an internet filter is so sexy is because if you think about what porn addiction is, it's about getting your reward as quickly as possible without having to incur any cost, any kind of delay. And the reason that people maybe like just install an internet filter and hope it fixes everything, it's literally the exact same mentality. It's just, oh, that's a quick solution. It doesn't cost much. And it's literally just reinforcing the same mindsets that built that addiction in the first place. And internet filters have their place. I'm not totally against them in the recovery process, but I think the point I'm making more is just that this mindset is getting reinforced between social media and technology and the messages that we kind of get through our media about relationships and everything. I think that skill of slowing down is very important. You work with a lot of high performing men and men who probably are like a million miles a minute and they're on to the next. So how would you help somebody who you can just tell like, okay, this guy just doesn't know how to slow down or he doesn't know how to relax? How does a guy get started on that journey?
Well, a lot of the behaviors are reinforced in coaching because they have no other choice. And in this hour, it's dedicated to building those skill sets. But the first task I always give men is within your first 10 to 15 minutes of the day, can you do a somatic exercise where you're just getting back into your body and creating that space for yourself and signaling to yourself that you are the first priority of the day? Because usually men who are high performing, everything else is the priority, not them. It kind of depends, right, on what their problem is. Because a lot of high performing men can be type A, where their health is first, their religion is first. Like, they've got a really good set of core values, but they just put themselves on the back burner. Or it's like they're chaotic in the sense that they don't do any self care. And then they're waking up in the middle of the night because their cortisol levels are off the charts and things like that. But the first thing that you always do, no matter what, in order to get aligned, is to get back into your body because the body teaches you to be in the present moment and you help slow down your breathing, you help slow down your cortisol levels, and it helps turn the prefrontal cortex back on so you can think more clearly and plan things out. And the thing with porn too, like I totally agree with what you said, is like the satisfaction of having something without working for it is just an empty vessel. You constantly need more, but there's a hole in the bottom of the cup because we only find fulfillment when we work for something. If we don't work for something, We get that instant gratification, but it's gone in a second. It doesn't feel good actually. So that's why we become addicted, because the addiction, like, addiction is just like as if you're working for something, but it's collapsed time, right? So you've taken out the time it takes to earn something, so you don't get the satisfaction. So you just like you're compacting all these things, and you're like, why am I not happy? Why am I addicted to this? Well, you're not necessarily addicted to it. You just never feel fulfilled. So it's kind of like eating nothing. You're always hungry. But once you actually eat something, once you actually work towards something, the addiction goes away because fulfillment has replaced it.
No, that's exactly. I mean, we say porn is fast food intimacy. Like you literally use the
Yes,
exact same metaphor we use, right? Like it's like you get your calories really quick. You didn't have to hunt the meat. You didn't have to cook it. You just, swiped your card and you got what you wanted. But it might temporarily satisfy the cravings, but it's ultimately going to leave you hungrier. And if you keep doing it that way, eventually you get out of shape. And we see this, like we were talking about relationships, like we see porn addiction just ruins people's intimacy in their marriages. It ruins their productivity at work, their ability to lead their families and raise their kids. And all of it is just because you're feeding your soul with something that is highly rewarding, but you didn't have to work for. You didn't earn it. There was no satisfaction. And it's so funny how it's like kind of it's like the soup du jour of our society, which is like you deserve it and things shouldn't have to be hard. And when in reality, it's like actually some of those hardships or some of the things that you go through to earn something is that's what makes life life. Like that's what
it's
makes
the
these things
best
rewarding in the first
reward.
place. Yeah,
The
it's the
reward
best
is the
resort.
struggle. It's like no man is like satisfied with the one night stand. Men who get married, I'm sure, like when you said you're married, I'm sure she didn't make it super easy for you. Maybe you felt at peace with her, or there was some type of fulfillment. But when you marry someone, like if the man doesn't have to work for it, I know that sounds bad, maybe it sounds sexist, but like if the man doesn't have to work for it, if he doesn't have to hunt, he doesn't really want it. Because imagine you're going on a deer hunting trip and the deer walks right up to your camp the first day. Are you going to shoot it just so you get a kill? No, you want to like spend some nights in the cold. You want to eat some tuna out of the can. You want to be in the the watchtower for hours, so that the last day when that buck comes and you have to hunt it down, that's the satisfaction. It's not satisfying if it's just there already for you. It just lays down and says, "Take me home." You're like, "No, I don't want this. This is not the natural way of things."
No, no, it's funny. I interviewed Laterris Whitfield recently. I don't know if you know who he is. He's got a platform called Dear Future Wifey, and anyways, we got on this random tangent in the interview about how we love watching animal videos. Like we love watching lions just like hunt a giraffe. It's the coolest thing, and it's all about for us. It's all about the chase. Like that's what makes those videos exciting. Like if in the first 20 seconds the lion just gets the giraffe, that's boring. We guys just naturally want, like, we like that chase, and I think it's wired into us. Like I actually think that's part of why we like watching those videos, is exactly what you're saying. Like there has to be a process. And I know for me, when I reflect on my relationship history before I met my wife, every relationship I got into, even just going on a date with someone, was because they came to me. It was like, oh, they showed interest. Like it was like a softball lob. Like I didn't have to risk any kind of rejection, put myself out there. It was like I knew she was into me and whatever. And like surprise, surprise, either it never led to anything, or if it did lead to something, that something was a very dysfunctional relationship that was never really that rewarding for me. My wife was really the first person where I was interested in her and I had no idea what she thought about me. And me asking her out was like, there was like, in my head, there was a 95% chance she said no. But I knew I had reached a point in my own development where I knew I had to start taking these risks. Otherwise, I was going to keep attracting the same woman and I was never going to get into a relationship that would actually be fulfilling for me. And sure enough, my wife, like the first words out of her mouth after I asked her out was, I don't want to be in a relationship. That was like the first thing she said to me. And I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Like this is gonna be a no. This is gonna hurt. And she kind of like was talking it through. I could tell she was like a bit undecided. And ultimately, she said, "You know what? I'm willing to grab a coffee, but like don't expect much. That was basically what she told me. And then we hit it off and we went for coffee and like the rest was history. But I know for me, I needed to have those experiences of actually like properly putting something at risk to really get something rewarding in my relationship life. And I just think that so much of our society is deprogramming us from the very thing that we need to be fulfilled and satisfied, excuse me, in our lives.
Amen.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. So when guys are coming to you, they're they're having relationship issues. We said those were like some of the core issues that guys deal with, regardless of a pandemic or technology or the year it is. What are those specific relationship issues that seem to come up again and again for men?
Well, usually the men who I'm coaching are already married and just kind of struggling with connection, or I mean, there's a whole range of issues that I see. Another common issue is having married kind of like the wrong woman, but the commitment and loyalty that this man has is like he wants to do things right. Usually he married someone when he was young and he didn't understand himself like men are trying to now. It's kind of like you get a job, you get married, like that's just the way things go. And you don't really think about your own happiness. You don't really think about core values. You don't really think about things that you have in common. So then, like 20 years later, you're there kind of like, I don't know if I even really like this person because they don't reciprocate emotion. They can't hold space for me. Their physical intimacy has died. So um, it's kind of issues like that where we have to reassess our own core values and figure out who we are so that we can either mend the relationship or allow it to part ways.
How much of those dynamics are like like there's some relationships where I know one person is working really hard on themselves, they're developing, and like you said, maybe over a couple years, there's whatever, like everyone's doing their thing, but then 20 years later, this guy has found out a lot more about himself. He's learned about what he wants and what he needs, and he's maturing. And then maybe you have a partner who is not really on that development journey. They're not growing. Because I know for me, I think of who my wife and I are today as individuals compared to 8 years ago when we first met. We're very different people. If you told me my wife was going to be this person, this is who I was marrying, I don't know. I think that would have been weird. I don't know that it would have stopped me, but it just I wouldn't have been able to believe it. But I think the reason, even though we're so different now from who we were back then, like we've grown together, and I think that's been a huge part of it. Is that dynamic at play at all, or is it just that sometimes people grow and it just creates these challenges later on?
Well, yeah, exactly like you said. Like, if the relationship is growing together, even if you're growing differently, that can really work because you're both acknowledging that change is happening. And when you get married, you have to understand that when you say, I love you through sickness and in health and whatever, a lot of people forget that they're not thinking ahead in the future. They're just assuming I'm going to love this person through this, but they don't understand how that person can change. So they're committing to who that person is in that moment. Time changes you, events in life change you, opinions change. So I always emphasize, if you're not married already, look at the core values that you have and what you can live with, and look at the core values that they have and the character traits that they have by themselves. So, like, if you're a person who is really into health and fitness and you marry someone who's not really into health and fitness, but you're really attracted to them, they've got a good body. Like, people, after a few years, when the love dies, they're always going to fall back on themselves. They're not going to fall back on the love they have for you. So let's say you get with someone and then they're all like kind of active with you because that's what you like and you're all about it. But a few years later, maybe they start putting on some pounds and you start getting upset because you're like, well, it wasn't like this in the beginning. But you knew who they were in the beginning. They didn't really care about their health and fitness and nutrition, right? So now you start to not like them and then you start to resent them because now they're changing. But really, are they changing or are they just becoming more like themselves, right? And then that other person is like mad because they're like, you're supposed to love me no matter who I am, right? But that was just, it's a lapse in your judgment. Like, you have to be more logical in your relationships. You cannot just rely on love. That's what I'm understanding from my own coaching. It's kind of made me a little less romantic, let's say. It's like you have to be very strategic. You have to be very logical. So if you're into health and fitness and having a good body and yourself and your partner is important, find somebody who that is one of their core lifestyle values, whether they're with you or not, whether they're sick or not. Like, this is something they're going to uphold, they're going to do. Because then 5, 10, 15 years later, when the love wears off, you can still respect that person because they have the same alignment that you do. And so you have a better chance of staying together because you're like, okay, we're partners no matter what, because like our lifestyles align.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love what you said earlier. Like, there's actually there has to be kind of a logical piece to this whole relationship thing, because if we're just emotional about it, which is sort of the Disney story, or like that's kind of what Hollywood has
Mm-hmm.
sold us on, right? Is love is a feeling, and you fall in love, and as long as the feels are there, you're going to be good. Like my parents are Indian. They had an arranged marriage, and they just think like Hollywood is the stupidest thing ever, right? Because the whole concept of love in an Indian culture is it's very logical. I mean, there's literally like applications where it's like the family's religion and their caste and the educational background and are the values aligned. It's very methodical, and
So we should
you
do.
yeah, like there's some merit there, right? And then
That's
you
why they
learn
last so
to
long, because you just like, you know what you're getting into exactly. There's no fluff. There's
yep,
no like glamour to it. And then you learn to cultivate love, not just,
yes.
you know.
Yeah, my dad's thing is if you can fall in love, you can fall out of love. But if you learn to love, you'll never unlearn it. And I think that's the whole premise. I mean, you think about like why the divorce rate is so low in Indian cultures, and I think it's a huge part because they're being united on things that actually make sense for a lasting relationship. Like you're talking about earlier, right? Like if you're aligned on core values and things that are really important to you, and like not things that are like vain and superficial, right? But things that are actually like really intricate to the human experience. I think it makes sense. You set yourself up for success, but it feels like we've lost that in our society a bit. So it makes sense the way like when you're talking men through relationship issues, these things are coming up. How do you help them? So if a guy is in that place like 20 years down the road and he realizes, okay, I had a maybe an unfair expectation of this person because actually the way they presented themselves from day one is aligned with how they're living, but now I don't like it. Um, what is a guy supposed to do at that point?
Well, the object of my coaching is always to focus on him and his own journey. And if it's in a marriage and the marriage is dire, like obviously we always try to save and salvage that union. But unfortunately, sometimes it just doesn't work out. He decides of his own volition as like, I'm not being respected, or I'm being abused, or like, really, I love this person, but like we're just not getting it. It's been years. They've put a good hand in to try and make it work. Sometimes it doesn't work out, and sometimes they can change a new leaf. But the core difference of if it works or not is, are both players playing? Because if there's only one person playing, it just never, nothing ever changes. Nothing ever works out. And that's usually where they find themselves. Usually, when I'm coaching someone, there's only one person invested in self development, and the other person's just kind of hanging out.
Yeah, it makes sense. So, the one thing that I've observed since like I've also been coaching men for I think it's been about 6 years, and I actually somebody else helped me connect the dots. I was listening to like a health fitness guy, and he had us fill out this survey. So it was like, okay, if you've experienced this in your life, check off the box, and the different things he had listed had a score beside them. So it was like if you're having a baby, that was like a 50. I think 50 was the max. Baby, moving, and maybe career change. But there, you were like adding everything up. And in the health and fitness context, if your score was in certain ranges, you were more prone to diseases and whatever. That was sort of the point he was getting at. But one of the things that I realized, and I hadn't pieced this together prior, is how often changes in our life cause us stress that can like make or break us. Because I know for me, I have this story of overcoming pornography addiction, and all the hardship I went through is now the story that I get to use to help other guys quit porn and improve their lives. But if I think back to since I've been clean of pornography since 2016, the hardest things that I've gone through in my life have all been in seasons of big change. Like when my wife and I became parents last year, our marriage really went through the ringer for a few months. It was just a huge adjustment, and you know, you can do all the prep in the world. Like some of these life changes, they just catalyze these really difficult situations and circumstances. And I just wanted you to comment if you have anything to mention about life change and maybe how underappreciated that is and how it can affect a man in the state he's in, because we accept the promotion at work because of all the opportunity it presents. We don't always think about the implications though of working more hours, having more stress, and just the shift that can cause in the other areas of our life. Like how much does life change often factor into guys when they're coming to you to actually get some coaching?
So, life change will make or break you depending on the level that you've trained for it. And this is what we try to teach. This is what I try to teach all my clients, because sometimes we get through whatever immediate needs they have, and they think, okay, I'm good now. And I say, you're not good now. Now is the time when we need to train. Just because the war's not happening doesn't mean the war's not coming. And if you're not battle ready, of course it's going to take you out because you don't have the tools, you haven't practiced, you don't have the skill set. So when it comes to something like life changes, like having a baby, and your wife's full of hormones and she's pissed off and both of you are sleep deprived and you want to die because sleep deprivation is like the worst thing you can ever do, and then just a screaming baby you have to keep alive, you have to literally keep this thing alive, and it's pooping everywhere, like that puts you at the edge. That makes you go crazy. So it's like that's a level of training that you can't really prepare for before you get there, but you can prepare your mental state by doing certain self disciplines, right? Like how trained are you? This is what we're missing from society right now with the instant gratification and the men who don't necessarily want to put effort into dating. It's like it's not even about what you deserve as a man, because a lot of men are getting offended because they're like, well, we do all this and we're not getting, our reward, which is fair enough, but actually your reward is the discipline you develop in yourself to become a strong man, because you are built for this. If you want to be a strong leader and you want to be the best person you can be, we get satisfaction from the disciplines. We don't get satisfaction from just getting something from nothing, like we talked about at the beginning. So it's like if you are training in the off times, in the best of times, to have self discipline, you will be able to handle the hard times so much better. Like if you are already practicing empathy and strong communication before you and your wife have a baby, well, then when you and your wife have a baby, you're just more prepared for that. You already know, okay, she's gonna like hate me, I'm gonna hate her. We just need to get through a certain time period. Like that's just how it is. You've trained for it, so it doesn't impact you like this is the end of the world. You're like, no, this is just a time period. It's gonna be passing. I'm disciplined. I know how to get through sleep, but I've done fasting. Like, you can train yourself for certain things. Don't disregard your own capabilities. I think men really disregard their own ability to be strong because they're falling into this incel red pill mentality of like, we deserve more. Like that actually zaps your masculinity away. It's not about women. It's not about, submitting to whatever. It's about building yourself up so you can feel proud of yourself at the end of the day and get through some hard crap. I went off on
Yeah.
a tangent there.
No, that's good. It's really, really good. Well, and I think like when I reflect back, even just using my marriage as an example, it's actually exactly what you said. My wife and I were investing into our marriage prior. We were both doing therapy and counseling, and we were listening to podcasts together and stuff like that. It didn't stop us from having the hard times because it was a huge adjustment. But when we came out on the other side and we felt like, hey, the marriage is clicking again, and I think we're a little bit more used to this new environment, what actually got us through the hard times and out of it were the skill sets and the things that we were practicing beforehand. So I think you're bang on there. What should, if a guy is in that season right now, so things are relatively stable at home and the relationship part is good, whatever good is for him based on where he's at in life. Like if things are going well, obviously there is of course a piece of enjoying it. We're not saying don't enjoy it and just constantly be on guard because bad times are coming. Enjoy it. What are some of the core areas where you'd say, regardless of what's coming, whether it's planned like having a child or moving, or maybe there's some unplanned battles that are down the road here for you, what are skills that a guy should be building to I guess capitalize on those seasons when things are going well?
So I guess something to always fall back on. I have something called the four pillars of men's mental health. So physical, spiritual, relational, and emotional, but I would actually trade one of those out for financial. If you can be financially disciplined and physically disciplined, emotionally disciplined and spiritually disciplined, like you have something as a compass to guide you in all of those areas. You have disciplines where you're pushing yourself, not just you're in this monotonous state. Once you feel yourself being comfortable, push yourself, sign up for a challenge, sign up for a competition, become a leader at your church, do something that forces you into responsibility when you have none, because it's going to keep you on your toes. You don't want to be overly exerting yourself, stressed to the max, but why not push your limits? Because then once you push your limits, you have a wider window of limits that, like, like if you haven't gone through any struggles in life, I really feel bad for you. I feel bad for the people who got a spoon handed to them because they have no capacity. They have no capacity. I've been to India. I've slept on like a wooden I've slept on the floor. I've slept on a wooden bed with like three other people. Like you're in a shack. I've traveled all over the world. I've been in some dodgy places. So like nothing phases me. Like nothing phases me in life. I'm never stressed. I'm never anxious. Unless it's like relationship stuff, like most people, right? Like when other people come into play and they start messing with your mentality. But it's like you need to put some struggle on your shoulders so that you can understand your capabilities. You need to.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think there was a time where people would just avoid hardship. Like we would kind of just ignore it. We take the easy way out. I think people still do that. But now, like you mentioned sort of the silver spoon thing that's going on, and I do feel like we are becoming a little bit more like that. You almost have to sometimes just go out and not create your own challenges. Like you don't need to go be a crap disturber for no reason. But it's almost like you do need to be really self-aware of, even as you're talking, I was thinking about my spiritual life, and I was thinking like my spiritual life is actually really healthy, and I have like built the disciplines of spending the first part of my day. I read my Bible and I journal and I pray, and we're at church every Sunday. My wife and I are both musicians, so we're involved in the worship team, and like I was like, yeah, that area by the outside looking in looks like, man, it's pretty steady and it's pretty healthy. But I actually feel like that's the area of my life right now where I'm not really being stretched or challenged. Like it's got a bit of monotony to it. And I was really
Mm-hmm.
feeling a conviction as you're talking, like that's something I need to think about actually, is how am I going to go push myself, because there's nothing really built into my life that's pushing me there. So I like what you're saying. I think there's a lot of validity, and I don't think we're always maybe eagerly seeking those opportunities as much as we should be.
Yeah. Well, and if you have a spiritual connection to God, He's always presenting you opportunities to glorify Him. So, are you communicating with God in a way that's asking Him, what do you want me to do next? That's the prayer that I say the most. Like before I even ever became more religious I used to be like more spiritual. I always believed in God, but it was like more about energy and whatever. But I always used to say to the universe, I was like, okay, I'm ready for the next challenge that's going to bring me towards whatever my destiny is. And then, oh my God, my life would fall apart. Like my life is always falling apart from whatever I created because it forces you. People listening to this might go, that's really woo woo, but it works. It happens. You are presented with the challenges you need to make your soul and your spirit grow. And it's never something you would expect. It's always a hardship or a calling to let go of something or to be generous in a way that you never would, or to go somewhere. Like we talked about me moving to Mexico. I just moved here to Tampa like 7 months ago and I signed a lease and I haven't done that for years. And then all of a sudden, I went to Mexico for a week and I was like, I need to move here. And then I was talking to God and I was like, is that really true? Because I just got to Tampa and I have all this stuff and am I running away? And there was just such a conviction inside of me that was like, no, you have to go. You have to end your lease. That's where you're supposed to be. And that sounds crazy to most people, but when you cultivate a relationship with what you know to be your inner truth or God, you start following those pings and your life becomes incredible despite the hardships you might endure, because a lot of us will live in the safety zone and then we get to the end of our lives and we're like, what was the point? was the freaking point, right? Because you were so scared and you followed what society told you. So as a man, and now we kind of talked about religion, so I'm just going to go full bore into that. As a man, you have a purpose, you have a destiny that you need to follow, that you know in your heart of hearts that if you're not working towards that, you feel unfulfilled. And if you're on that path, they always say that when you're at the highest, that's when the devil comes for you. And a man's soft spot is always going to be for a woman. So when he's at his highest, when he's on his path, beware of the woman who comes right directly in your path to steer you off course. If you're not a man who is so set in his ways, you're going to be the man who changes into the nice guy. Or, like if you're kind of weak in your spiritual core of like not following your destiny, the right woman is going to help build that with you. The wrong woman is going to take you off course, and you're going to willingly go with her. So you have to cultivate the skill set to stay on your path, to become fulfilled, and to not blame anybody else when you get off course, but to just re-get on course if you get lost.
Yeah. I actually didn't know this about your story. Can you tell me a little bit about like kind of going from the more spiritualist energy kind of vibe to finding a relationship with God? What was that like for you?
Yeah, well, when I was little, I really wanted to be part of church and part of God. But my neighbors, when I was young, told me could never be part of God because I wasn't baptized. And so
Oh
from
wow.
that, yeah, so from that moment, I kind of like rejected the church because I just felt like everybody in the church had rejected me and ostracized me and looked at me differently. I felt it in parts of my family and in people I interacted, and I was like, it just doesn't make sense that God would hate certain people. Why would he create them to hate them? So I was just like, I believe in God and I believe in Jesus, but I don't believe in the Bible and I don't believe in like the organized church.
Hmm.
And then like a year ago, I started feeling this calling to maybe become more invested in the word, like more invested. I was like, maybe I should read the Bible because I never read it. I never even read
So
it.
interesting. And
Um,
all because of that experience early on? Like that experience early on basically just told you like I'm not going to read the Bible. I don't really want to be involved in whatever these people are doing.
Yeah,
It's
because
not
I
right,
did
but
just
God
felt
makes
such a,
sense.
I felt, yeah, and this is why I really believe in God. Like, I don't believe in all religions that we're talking about different gods. I believe there is one creator that we're all talking about. I have respect for every religion. Um, but like, obviously, I guess I would associate more with Christianity at this point in my life. But yeah, I just felt like the Christians that I had encountered were so aggressive and hypocritical. And I still think that a lot of Christians are aggressive and hypocritical and demanding and not following the essence of God. And here's the thing that I say is like, I don't have the Bible memorized. I've never read it fully. I've read stories and I've read parts. And but I know that I have a strong relationship with God because I follow his command. And no one can take that away from me. And that's not hypocritical. And I'm not trying to convert anybody. I do think everybody should find within them a spirit, like, because it was a knowing. How could I, as a child, feel this calling towards a greater creator? Like, as a child, like, all of us know these things. So I just know that it has to be a truth because children know things that, like, there would be and all of us in the world can't be lying. Like, we know something, it in your gut, right? So whatever name it goes by, maybe we won't know until we die, really. But what kind of relationship are you creating with that, and not creating with your ego? So anyway, I fell into it fully, like in February when I got here. I got out of a toxic relationship. I've been in really low points, but this time I was like, dude, I can't do this by myself. God, please help me, take this pain away. I promise. I will follow you and speak your name if you just help me. And that relationship ended. That person exited my life, and it was so freaking painful. But I found solace in the church. I found this conviction and just this fulfillment that I had just never felt before. And then I knew every intuition that I'd ever had, every guidance that I'd ever had, because my life has fallen into place. I've never planned anything. I knew in that moment that that was all God. And then I said, you know what? I'm not going to call it spiritual anymore. This is God. He has a mission for me, and I'm giving it all to Him. I don't take any glory, and I'm happier because of that.
Good for you. That's amazing. I love it. I love when you can look back and say like, oh, okay, it was God all along. Like he was there and it just kind of took me time to piece it together. I think that's amazing. I love that journey you're on.
Yeah, and I love
What's
the forgiveness of it, of like, because I was all in the ego, like, oh, I can choose my destiny and I control. And listen, I still believe that a lot of Christians are hypocritical and they grew up in the church and they're just doing kind of like what they heard, but they don't have the experience of it. And I really wish that they would have the experience of a pain that allows them to understand Christ's sacrifice. Because that, like, your relationship with God is the most important part of your love of God, not just you acting on it. Because some people are going to die and they're going to have fasted, they're going to have read the Bible, but they didn't cultivate a true relationship with God.
Yes, it's so true. Well, the Bible even says that, like, that in the last days there will be people who say, like, Lord, look at all the things we did. You know, we cast out demons in your name and we prophesied in your name. And God will say to them, like, turn away from me, I never knew you, you know? Because I think in the church, this is so now this is coming from somebody who was I was a pastor's kid. Well, I guess I am a pastor's kid, grew up in the church, was a pastor myself. And I do think that the church can be really guilty of just overemphasizing, like, are you doing all the right things? Does everything look prim and proper from the outside looking in? But I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, actually, the most important thing is, like, God said, I never knew you, as in, I wanted a relationship with you all along, but you were just trying to do the stuff. You were trying to do church and trying to do the Christian thing when really he's after that relationship more than anything else. So I think you're spot on. What's been the most interesting thing? Like, has reading the Bible been, do you enjoy it? Is it like, is it hard to make sense of everything? Is there anything that you're like, why is this in here? Or what, like, what's been your experience like reading the Bible the last year?
It was hard to make sense of it before I committed to Christ. It was almost like, that part in the Bible where Jesus says, let those with ears hear and let those with eyes see. It was almost like when I was being spiritual, I could not understand the word. Like, I didn't have ears that could hear, I didn't have eyes that could see. The second I was like, you know what, God, it's all you, the story suddenly it was so much easier to read. Suddenly I was able to absorb the wisdom, and I was like, damn, like the the wisdom of the Bible was hidden from me as if in a different language because I did not open my heart to understanding. I did not have eyes that could see. I just realized that now as I told you that. So yeah, now I really enjoy it, and I really enjoy. I love the church that I go to. They break down the lessons so easily, and it's stuff that I can use in my own coaching, whether my clients are religious or not. Um, it's just valuable, man. Like, even if you're not, like, what a good read, right? Like, if you can harness the wisdom, you can live a good life. Like, the rules are meant to protect you, and this is like roundabout back to like men being men, and this whole feminist movement, and where people are today. Like, the devil is alive, right? Like, in society, we have made this huge push to be so free that we've lost order and we've absorbed chaos. We think it's better. We think it's better to be sexually free. We think it's better to just do everything all by ourselves. We're more lonely. We're more anxious. We're more depressed. There's more fatherless homes. There's more disease. There's more cancer. In what way did we actually think that getting rid of this set of rules that was actually meant to protect us, we thought that was better for us, but it's not better for us. We're actually living in all of this, for lack of a better term, sin. And we thought we would be happier, and we're not. And that is the disguise of the devil. He presents something as if this is the best way. Don't you want this? And then you're like, yeah, I do. But you get it, and you're an empty vessel, and you're not fulfilled. And so it's actually the withholding. It's actually the discipline. It's actually the waiting and the perseverance, and that makes you happier. So that applies to life, and if you want to go to God's kingdom.
Man, it's
Dang, I'm
so
really
true.
channeling right now.
I'm loving it. This is so good. I think that's such a good point you made because I know when I first started talking about freedom from pornography addiction, I remember it was interesting just hearing people's responses of like freedom because everybody thinks they're sexually free, you know, because I can express myself the way I want to. I can watch whatever I want to. Now with AR and VR, I can experience whatever I want to. And we think that's what freedom is, not realizing that real freedom, whether you're talking about financially, physically, sexually, spiritually, there's always boundaries. Like it's the discipline piece that actually gets you the freedom, and it's the discipline piece that protects it. Like there's no such thing as you can just indulge in whatever you want without consequence. That world doesn't exist. Real freedom is I'm making the decisions I want to make, and I'm choosing my consequences, consequences,
Mhm.
positive or negative. And I just think that's so lost. That's such a good point. Very well said.
Yeah, and it's something that was really frustrating me that came with the recent election. I know that we might be digressing a bit, but it's like a lot of women were angry that Kamala didn't win because they were very afraid that their rights would be taken away and that like abortion rights would be taken away. First of all, that wasn't true because I guess it's being left all up to the states anyway. But second, I think our focus is so on the wrong thing. As a society, we've become so focused on solving the symptoms of a problem and not solving the problem itself. So we're pushing this sexual freedom agenda. Sleep with whoever you want, take risks, here's more birth control, instead of the truest form of birth control, which is being very picky about who you're sleeping with in the first place. And so we're just diving into immediate gratification and not thinking about the consequences. And then you want an immediate gratification to end the consequence that you dove into. And I don't think it's all a woman's responsibility to just keep her legs closed. I think men have a responsibility too, and that's the whole purpose. Is That's why I'm saying be disciplined. And this is something that's very frustrating for me as a woman who wants to wait for sex in a relationship in today's society, because I'm not married, right? And um, my recent dates that I've been on, they have, and this is also a lesson in being equally yoked because I've given people a chance who are not a Christian religion. And I realize that's a mistake. Um, but they're very pushy and they're like, well, why do we have to wait? And don't you want to blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no. And if you're pushing this on me, you are revealing who you are as a man. There's no discipline. There's no respect. There's no ability to wait. And if you don't have the ability to be disciplined, you're no better than an animal. And my respect for you goes away. Like it's like you're disgusting to me. Like the man should be more disciplined than the woman, essentially. Like the woman should be the ultimate form of seduction and temptation, and the man should be the ultimate form of resistance because he's so on his purpose and his goals. And when it's the other way around, now the woman is the masculine one, we've done this huge switch in society. So I know I kind of went in a circle there, but I don't like going back to the election thing. It's like we shouldn't be pushing the agenda of this free sex movement and this abortion anyway. We should get back to core values of people being disciplined and more choosy, because then a lot of the world's problems would disappear because women are pissed off that men don't try. But why would men try? Women are just giving the milk away for free, like they say, and men aren't happy and they think women are whores. And women are becoming kind of whores, but then women are like, I just want to be like a man. But it's like, dude, both people should be practicing discipline. I don't know. It's
Yes.
frustrating.
Yeah, well, and it's God's design, right? Like if both are actually practicing discipline, first for themselves, but then second, like with the benefit of the other person in mind, that is the breeding ground of a really healthy and safe relationship. My wife and I in previous relationships were not perfect, but by the time we had gotten together, we had both agreed individually, even before we met, that we didn't want to have
Mhm.
sex in our next relationship until we were married.
I
And
love that.
yeah, and again, so while you're dating, it's one thing. A lot of our friends, we were very involved in our church at the time. I mean, we still are. It's just a different church, but in that church, there were lots of young couples that were dating, engaged, and a lot of them had the same ethic, because it is the Christian ethic around sex and marriage and whatever. But then engagement is where you saw a lot of these relationships get derailed. And
Mm,
we were one of the later marriages to happen. So when we got engaged, a lot of our friends were checking in, like, "Hey, how are you guys doing?" And we're like, "Oh, we're fine actually." Like, and they were like, "No, I know you're fine, but how are you actually doing?" Like, they kind of thought we were covering it up. And
Mm.
we were like a little bit confused because then when we got married, all these stories came out of like, yeah, actually when we were engaged, like, we crossed this line and we couldn't do XYZ and whatever. And we just thought, we were like, oh, what, that wasn't our experience. I mean, there were some days where we had to be really careful and we were having transparent conversations and really trying to protect our boundaries. But I think that was the thing that we learned is a lot of it had, for them, had been about like, this is the thing you do and you just do it because it's the right thing to do. But there wasn't this essence
There
of
was an
like,
actual conviction.
yeah, there was an actual conviction. And then even for people who did have a conviction, like, this is the right thing to do for me, they didn't have the other person in mind. Like, I can remember a couple dates where it was like, man, it's not just that I don't want to cross the boundary, even though I'm tempted to in this moment, for my sake, because I'm a man of discipline and whatever. But like, I actually care about my, girlfriend or fiance, whatever she was at the time, enough that I'm not going to cross this line either. And I think that's God's design. Like, that's God's heart, is if we can always do the best thing, not only with our own well-being in mind, but actually the best thing for the other person in mind. That's marriage. Like, that's sacrificial relationship. And I think that's what love really looks like.
Wow. Yeah, and that's true masculinity right there, is being able to look beyond your own animalistic desires and say, I respect this person enough to not want them to feel bad about crossing their own boundaries. Like, let's say, even if you change your mind, you're like, man, I could do this right now. I wouldn't feel guilty, but I know they wouldn't feel good. And I'm willing to respect that of them. Like that's exactly what we're talking about. Like, that's the masculinity that we need, is a man who's willing to respect, and that comes from your own self-respect and your own love of the Lord, right? And that's why I think every man should have a relationship with God, because it's the father that is you can look up to as a perfect father, because our real fathers are going to let us down, they're going to disappoint us, but a lot of men will emulate their real father or their coach or their mentor, whoever stepped in for them, and then later on realize it's not really good enough. No man is good enough. And when I released that responsibility of my dad, hey, my dad is not going to be the male mentor that I need ever, because he's not perfect. um, Looking to God created a better relationship with other flawed humans, because he's going to send me a husband who will be respectful. And I can't look at like my dad for advice or anybody else, because they're going to pull me away from the perfection that I'm trying to strive towards.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, and your relationship with your dad probably got better too, because now you weren't expecting
Yeah.
something from him that only God could provide for you.
Yeah, now it's kind of like a friend, right? It's not when we're kids, we see our parents as gods, because they're the ones taking
Hmm.
care of us, and we feel like, oh, they can do no wrong. And then we get older and we realize, oh, they might not be great, but then we feel guilty because they raised us, and it just allows you to release so much guilt and just be like, oh, I don't need anything from them anymore, and I never needed anything from them, and everything is all good, and I just can forgive and live in peace. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's a beautiful thing. So, okay, well, now I want to ask you, because you talked a little bit about, you were dating somebody and then you broke up with them. And I guess I'm curious about that because relationships are so a part of your message. And I'm just wondering, how have you managed all that? Like, does a lot of your messaging come out of your experiences with relationships, or are they separate? And do you ever feel that pressure when you're in a relationship? Like, you're giving people relationship advice all the time, to figure this stuff out. Like, how does that part work? That sounds so interesting to me.
Yeah, when I was going through that relationship, it was all a secret, to my audience, and I had built up my entire business. Like, my business blew up. I gained like 200,000 followers in 4 months. And meanwhile, near the end, it was getting very toxic, very verbally abusive, very manipulative. And I was just hiding all of this from my followers. But I would be able to at times translate the pain that I felt into the content, which really served a lot of men, because men and women are not so different in the pain that they feel. So by me just expressing my own pain through that, and being able to empathize from a man's perspective, I think it helped me grow closer with my audience, because my heart was just open for them. And then they were also able, I have a real community. When I moved into this apartment, they helped me like fill my apartment with furniture. Like, like they took care of me, you know, and that was like my first ever experience of receiving, because I've never really had any man provide for me or take care of me, except for my clients. Like my now I'm fully supported by men, right? But it's different. It's different. Like I can never be completely personal with the internet or with my clients. And so when I get into a relationship, yeah, I used to feel this pressure to stay, even if it was toxic, because I felt this responsibility. I have all these tools, so I can fix this, I can help them. Now I've absolved myself of that responsibility, and I try to stay focused on finding someone who has done their own inner work and who can meet me. And it's a tall task because obviously when you're a coach, you've done all this work, you need someone who's really invested or who has come from like a very good family who kind of has the foundation already built into their DNA. But yeah, it was really hard. It was really hard. I would just stick it out because I was so loyal, not even necessarily to them, but to my own ability to change things.
Yeah, yeah.
And I realized that
Because that's what
that
you
was
do in
never
your
going to work.
job.
Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah. And then now, like, so you've obviously, like, you're diving into Christianity, plugged into a local church, really following God's leading for your life. And you mentioned not wanting to have sex before marriage. And
Hmm.
I'm just curious, how has that changed dating? I have to imagine that's just changed dating for you because it sounds like you were experiencing relationships that in maybe earlier seasons of your life would have been normal or you would have tolerated, and now you're drawing a much harder line. Has it made dating harder for you to draw a bit of a firmer line in the sand?
I mean, well, I grew up in Wisconsin, which is, like one of the Bible Belt places. My family wasn't religious, but there was this stigma of like, oh, if you have sex, you're kind of a whore. Um, so I always kind of grew up with the mentality that you should, like, I didn't wait until marriage, but I had the mentality of like, I need to be in a relationship with someone, like where we love each other. So that's always kind of been a practice for me to assess someone. I had a small time period where I was like, oh, let me try this casual thing out, and found out very quickly that was not for me. I had too many attachments, like it just wasn't in alignment with my core. Um, and now that I'm like, no sex before marriage, like I also had to go from this. So I started off in this community where it was the old school style, like men pay for things, you're taken care of. So my first couple boyfriends were amazing, and I never really thought about we're going to split things and contribute. Like it just was what it was. And then I started getting into like watching YouTube videos. And I remember this one Jenna Marbles video. I don't know if you know who she is. She was like an old school YouTuber. And she had said, I watched the video where she said, yeah, I don't think it's fair. Like, if you always expect them to pay for everything, she's like, I know the value of working. Like, screw it. Like, I'll pay for a couple beers. I was like, dude, that makes a lot of sense. Like, let me be a 50-50 girl, because I wanted a high value man, and I thought this is what men want. They want a woman who's at their level, success wise, career wise. And I was always like, look at how cool I am. Look at all the stuff I'm doing. Look at how hard I work. And then I got into those relationships where I was splitting things 50-50, and it was horrible. And then so the evolution of that was, oh, that's not what men are looking for, because I'm actually emasculating them. They feel like they have to compete with me. And so then, sorry, this is like a long story short about the celibacy thing, but it's like I then transitioned out of 50-50, and I was like, no, I want a man who takes care of me. So asking for that was really scary. But then when you ask for something the first time, it always becomes easier thereafter. You have to, start leveling up the things that you want and becoming braver in what you ask for. So it's just like you have to practice the skill set of asking for things that you want. So yes, I do want a man who has more traditional values, and a man who is willing to wait until marriage. And at first you think something is hard, but it's only because you're used to the environment where you have not experienced those values. But eventually you move into the place where you're like, oh wait, no, there is an abundance, and I don't need to wait and lack. And either way, I am not someone who has been addicted to sex. I'm not someone who cares. My most important relationship is the one that I have with God. So whether I have a husband or not, I don't really care. I've never really felt the drive to be a mother. Um, my only drive is to glorify God, and maybe not everybody feels that way. So it's like if I God God would not have a man for me who would not follow the core values that I'm feeling called to feel. You know what I'm saying? Like So why would I surrender to a man who, I mean, like, God would not deliver that type of man to me. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So I know if he doesn't have that, well, then I'm going to live the rest of my life alone or wait for the man God has for me, because he's not going to give me like a bum. He's not going to give me someone who's like not everything that I, wanted or believe that aligns with what I'm supposed to have.
Yeah, man, it's so good. It's so good.
It's
There's so
gonna
much
be an
depth to you,
episode for
Elise.
the ladies.
Yeah, it's good. No, but I think what you're saying is really important. And truthfully, what you just said, we hear from our guys all the time on Instagram and listening to the podcast, which is like these virtues and values all sound nice in theory, but then there's no good women out there, or I can't find somebody who aligns. And I think what you said is so important. A lot of people are saying that because either they're looking in places where those people don't go, or the environment that they've built is just not conducive. Like they're just so used to things a certain way. They're trying to draw that line in the sand, but maybe they're not fully committed. Like that's one thing I can hear in your
Yeah.
voice is this is not something you're thinking about. Like you have made a commitment to it. And now you know that maybe there is a little bit of a transition period, but eventually either like you said, like either God will bring those people because your environment is now set up for it, and if that doesn't happen, then you'll take it as a sign from God that like just continue to be single and keep doing your thing. But either way, you're going to ditch the environment that you were in to ensure you're at least set up for that opportunity to happen if God's going to make it happen.
Right. And you can't go out there with that mentality of, oh, there are no good women, there are no good men. Like, okay, cast this evil into your life. Like, I can't think of a more, disrespectful way to honor God is like saying there are no good women, there are no good men. Like, he's like, I did not, like there are no good women, there are no good men. Like, where is your faith? You're just expressing your own pain. And you got to get out of that mentality, because like you make a conviction and then you cast aside the worry. Like, I'm not out here like, oh my God, I'm on the dating apps. Like, I don't have dating apps. I don't have anything, because I just believe the universe will do its thing. Like, I don't have to worry about anything except for what I feel convicted to do in this moment. And God takes care of the rest. Like, people stress so much about where they're at in life and about what they need to do next and where the money's going to come from. Like, give it all to God. None of it was ever yours anyway. Why are you worried about that? You know?
Yeah, it's so true. I think you got a second career in preaching, Elise. I
Dude,
feel it.
you
It's
know
coming
what?
on.
I thought this might honestly be my future. Who knows? A second career in preaching.
It's been so good. I'm so grateful. I'm so glad we had this chat, and there's so much within you. It's so cool to hear your story and hear your wisdom. If my audience wants to find out more about you and what you're up to, what's the best way for them to do that, Elise?
I'm anywhere at Elise Micheals.
Okay,
TikTok, Instagram, website.
you got it. Yeah, we'll put the links in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time. This was so fun chatting with you today.
Thank you so much, Sathiya. I hope you have a great day. Send
You
love to
too,
your
and
family.
good luck with the move.
Thanks.